Hi everyone, this is Axel from dreamsanctuary.net, and today we're going to try something new. This is going to be the first installment of hopefully a long series that I've called Dream Dialogue. This is something I wanted to do for a while, is to have a dialogue over someone else's dream. I feel I've reached diminishing returns with presenting my own dreams. I'll surely present more here and there, but I feel it's time to open this process and to present back and forth between the dreamer and someone like me who's doing this work of interpretation. And so this week, or last week, a good friend of mine, Zaun, who's present on this call right now, posted a dream that I found really striking, and I think it's worth presenting to a large audience. And so, Zaun, would you like to introduce yourself in a few words?
Sure. I'm Zaun. Online, just go by Zaun Aura. And I have been recording my dreams for probably 15 years, something like that. And I started out lucid dreaming because it was something that just seemed too good to be true, but it's definitely possible, and it taught me a lot about myself. But now I'm just practicing regular dreaming, just recording my dreams and trying to do the best I can to understand what they try to tell me about myself and the world. And so now my interest is mainly has been dreaming and psychology and philosophy, and so I'm here to help elucidate this particular dream, I suppose.
Yes, so from my perspective, Zaun, you are, between an online acquaintance and a good friend. We've never met, but we've known each other for a while now. We've talked to each other for a bit. We have the same interests, either it's psychology or philosophy. We've been around the same circles, and I've been following your dreams, so I know where you are at a depth level. It's more like I know what challenges you've been facing up to here. So that gives me a lot of context to be able to present this dream with a certain degree of confidence. We're going to go into the dream. It would be nice if you could read it because it's your dream, and then we'll come back to the title.
All right. So this is a dream I had last week. I was with Nietzsche, the philosopher, and Jordan Peterson. We started out in this room where it was sort of like a lecture hall or something. And then Nietzsche had asked Peterson about his work, and then Peterson was explaining his work to him in his very articulate way he does. And I was sort of in the middle between them, looking at both of them, and Nietzsche was paying great attention to Peterson, and they're both seeming to have a lot of respect for each other. Then the dream changed where we were walking past this, I would say like a field with these barns, like different barns and sheds, and you could see them. The doors were open, and you could see inside them. And each of the barns had different shepherds of the past, like David and Moses and even Jesus. And so, as we were walking, we were listening to Nietzsche talk about what was the significance of these figures. What did they represent for their own times? How did they manifest in history, and what was it like for them, and why did they become so significant? What did they mean for their society and culture? What does it mean for their needs? And we were both keeping great attention on all of this. And I remember looking over at these barns, and it's like they each were tending to like a sheep or something, because that's what shepherds do. They tend to their animals, right? And the barns all they seemed all similar except for the one at the end. I remember looking behind, and there was this area down the road where we were walking on. It had like this array of all these different philosophers. It was like that image of the Greek pantheon, I guess. Like there's like an artwork that shows all the philosophers talking, like Socrates and Plato. It was sort of like that, but it had like all this bright light sort of emanating or surrounding that area. And that's where we had walked from. Des was kind of far behind us, and Nietzsche said that this was in the rear view mirror. I don't know why. like it was there behind us, but he particularly said rear view mirror, I remember. But anyway, the barn that was the most unique was Jesus's, and it had a black cross. And it was at the very end on the right, the very right barn at the end of this row. There was like a fire, I believe, that was on the cross or around it. And I remember wondering about what was going on. And there was like a particular feeling of death, I suppose, emanating from that barn. Forgot to mention, in the beginning, there, in the lecture hall, Nietzsche said to Peterson that he was the first to delve into the kind of work that he was doing, which was like this sort of trying to take these psychological truths and ground them in reality. I think that was fascinating. And so I think that's pretty much it.
You've titled this dream quite provocatively. If I had to give it a title, I would give a more gentle title, like, I don't know, Peterson and Nietzsche talking. And you came up with this revaluation of the death of God. Can you say a bit more about this?
Maybe it's because in the dream, there was a sense that Jesus was there, like alive, but I'm not entirely sure why I gave it that title. Maybe reevaluation is not the right word. Maybe it's like there's an evaluation occurring in the dream, but I'm not sure if that's the same meaning. It doesn't have the same meaning necessarily as revaluation, right? It's like, I'm not entirely sure.
That's okay. I just wanted you to comment on this. So on the screen, I've bolded the symbols that you felt were the key symbols, and I've underlined the one I think should be added to the discussion. So as the process of dream interpretation goes, we're now going to talk about each of those symbols separately. So on the left side of the pictures, this is what you provided to me. Well, when I ask you what are your spontaneous association with Nietzsche, you give me a few words, and for me what shows up is critic, aggravated, and frustrated. So there's a critic, and he's frustrated, he's looking for something, right? He's struggling with something. For Peterson, you said articulation, information, delineation, psychology. So this idea of making sense, explaining something, transforming potential into inhabitable order. So there's this idea of, logos behind it, of making something more palpable, right? He's the one who articulates things. For the rear view mirror, you said this was what's behind the back seat. There's the philosophers, and obviously the philosophers is wisdom and pleroma. We'll come back to that later. For the black cross, you said death, fire, ashes, darkness, burnt, shadow. And in Jesus' barn with fire on it, you said time periods, eras, lifetimes, shepherds, faith, leaders, models, role models, heroes, agrarian, and farm. And you gave me two more comments, which you touched, that there was a sense of death in this Jesus barn. Something's different about it. And they also the sense that Nietzsche wants to pay attention to the people who have come before you, let's say, in the rearview mirror, if you use the language of the dream. Do you want to add something to this? I think it's pretty thorough.
I don't think I have anything else to add.
Okay, so that would be the subjective side of things. That's your personal feeling about it. Now, because I've been working with dreams and symbols, I can propose a different interpretation. That would be the right-hand column. And this is more going to be on the amplification side of things. So this is how I approach these symbols in their largest possible context. Hopefully, I have the ability to bring something to the conversation that's not personal, but a bit more objective. Let's take the first symbol, which is Nietzsche. So Nietzsche is really the first person who has attempted to digest the death of God, right? He's really worked that theme as thoroughly as he could. Probably cost him his life. That's a debate for another time. And there's also an annunciation of the Antichrist, because he saw himself as an Antichrist. He has a bit of a John the Baptist role of annunciating the death of God, but also the coming of something. In the psychological language, this Antichrist would be seen as the transpersonal psyche, or the collective unconscious. So the book of Zarathustra shows a kind of magical world that has a collective dimension, and that would be this figure that is the Christ after the death of God. By Christ is the sovereign, the anointed one. Anyway, to survive this transition, Nietzsche talked about the need of going through a transvaluation of all values, which would split people into Übermensch and what's called the last man. So the Übermensch is the one supposedly who thrive in this transvaluation of all values, and the last man is the one who do not thrive. He disregards everything, he just gets distracted, and he doesn't engage with anything. I'll just add a comment here. It's not clear to me that the last man fails at the transvaluation of values, because if you manage to dismiss everything, you actually have transvalued all values. You've made the numinous banal, and you've made, distraction as the number one thing on your priority. So for me, the Übermensch and the last man is the same concept, two sides of the same coin. On a similar topic, Peterson is bringing also the question of what mode of being is necessary to survive this transition. But here it's more about surviving the disorientation of postmodern times. And Peterson is associated, for me at least, with the image of the lobster. This is really how I see things, Sometimes I see these elements on the world, I'm like, oh, wow, this has a dreamlike quality to it. And so why is Peterson associated with the lobster? And when I found this arcana in the Tarot de Marseille, this is the Jodorowsky version on the right, there's the moon, la lune, which is arcana number 18, and there's a lobster in it. And this struck me as like, okay, what's going on? And by feeling into this, it seems that the lobster is coming out of the depths, through the water, and is reaching kind of this moon or this sun upwards. And I think this is a good way to understand Peterson, is this liminal figure that has come out of nowhere and has brought a lobster-like element, so kind of a victorious attitude to the surface. He has brought something almost out of the depth towards, the sun, the light. This is why some people sometimes call Peterson the prophet, because he has this quality. It's not just that. And so when Peterson came to fame, I think the lobster element of him was really impacting young men and young women. This has changed since his problem in Russia. Everyone who's following him has noted tone shift. So I'm really talking about Peterson from his rise to fame and his problems with the benzodiazepine and something like this. Let's go back to the dream. So we have this discussion about what modes of being to take, and then we see the shepherds of the past. This obviously brings the idea of Christ as the good shepherd. David, Moses, and Jesus. So David is a beloved Jewish monarch, and I know that Zaun has a special relationship with the name David. And Jewish prophet and leader, that's Moses. And Jesus is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And if we stay into this Jewish thing, according to John 18, 33, 37, he's attributed the role of King of Jews. So we have a Jewish monarch, a Jewish prophet, and a king. For the philosophers in the rearview mirror, we have a lineage of philosophers. There's probably a kid crying in the background. I'm sorry for that. So this lineage of philosophers mean the lovers of Sophia. So there's a kind of tradition that's coming in the background, right? We see in the background this lineage of lovers of Sophia. And then there's this idea that Zaun's ego in the dream, so Zaun's dream ego is in the front row, is the first. And to me, as an amplification, there's an inheritance of a transpersonal task, of a patriarchal tradition. I use the word patriarchal because they're all men. There's no woman in here. Finally, maybe the most important symbol, which I kept for the end, is this discussion on the black cross in Jesus' barn with fire on it. So for me, this is the cross in a state of blackness, which is called the nigredo in alchemy. We'll see why it means undiscovered or repressed. And the barn is the place where the divine child is born. I want to talk about the cross because this is really the key symbol. There's this magnificent quote from Collected Works 5. This is what Jung writes: the cross, or whatever other heavy burdens the hero carries, is himself, or rather the self, his wholeness, which is both God and animal. Not merely the empirical man, but the totality of his being, which is rooted in his animal nature and reaches out beyond merely human towards the divine. His wholeness implies a tremendous tension of opposites, paradoxically at one with themselves, as in the cross, their most perfect symbol. And then I've put some quotes about the blackness. We see that the blackness means the unconscious, or the nigredo blackness is the initial state, either present from the beginning as a quality of the prima materia, the chaos or massa confusa, or else produced by the separation of the element. So the blackness is what's in the personal unconscious. It's what's present at the beginning but has not been discovered or made conscious. And on the left, you see a picture. This is from Collected Work 9.1. Jung writes that this has been painted by a woman who has a shadow problem. So those were the association and amplification. Now, for the personal context, this is what you wrote to me. So this is from Zaun's perspective. I was cleaning my room recently and there was a synchronicity with Moon and Mary. 555 has been showing up a lot. I've been thinking about reading the Action Bible, been going to the library to read more often now. On Reddit, I've been reading a lot about Gnosticism and how our world is a prison. And then you talk about your favorite hobby, your passion. I've been thinking of making a DDLC, Doki Doki Literature Club mod as well. I like to think about how people have been affected by the game. Been looking at a lot of recent fan art too. Been also seeing how strong the community still is. Do you want to add something to that personal context? And I think it's fine as it is, but maybe there's something you want to say.
Yeah, the moon one was interesting. Like, I was out driving and I saw, I don't know, some place called the moon. It had moon in its name, like some kind of restaurant or I don't know, some place, small storefront. And then I think it was in Spanish. It was like Luna. Synchronicities surprised me in that they can occur in ways you don't expect. In that case, there was different languages, but they had the same meaning, so that meaning created the synchronicity. And I don't know if I have any much else to add, except that I've also been looking into Christianity in general a bit more as well. Like, I feel like I'm trying to like come to terms with like the value of the Christian ethic, and then all these Gnostic ideas that have value as well, but there's obviously some things that collide with these ideas, and so I'm trying to, I guess, reconcile them.
So now I'm going to give my side of the personal context, because there's not much here in what you wrote that would help to understand the dream. So I'm going to give some general observation, from my perspective. So I see you as someone who has an overactive unconscious. You have a lot of dreams and you write, it's pages and pages. And every time there's this undercurrent that the unconscious is asking you to participate. For me, this is very clear. Then you tend also to be bombarded by synchronicity, but there's a sense that you don't really know how to deal with them. And so you kind of resign to have to brush them away continuously. It's too overwhelming. Would you say that's fair?
It depends. There was a recent synchronicity from today that I engaged with, I suppose. But I think that there's some that I just don't, anything with numbers, I just don't understand like how to engage. But
Neither do I.
Generally, I know that I need to engage, but I don't think that I'm always able to fully engage, if that makes sense. Like I can make these small adjustments, but I don't think it's something that comes to me easily.
Yeah. And this is something I've seen you, you work hard at dream interpretation, you write a lot, but from my perspective, you rarely get there. You rarely get at the center, at the inside that's in the dream. You kind of remain at a surface level. You don't find the access to what the dream is trying to say. So there's something that's missing for you gaining this forward momentum for, the purpose of individuation. And now when I see a dream like this, I'm kind of worried because I see it's not going to go away. And yet the process is stalled from your perspective. You just said that, you can make small changes. So if it's not going to go away and you don't necessarily know what to do, there's going to be a lot of pressure. It's not necessarily good to remain in that state. There's one thing that's going to break out, and usually it's the unconscious that wins. And it's really not desirable to have this. Okay, so we've gone through the main elements. So the dream, the spontaneous association and some amplification, the personal context. So now we can revisit the dream and maybe see if we can understand this dream. For people who are new to dream interpretation, the way I go into a dream is I see this dream as everything is Zaun's unconscious. So there's the dream ego, and that's Zaun as an ego inside the dream. And then everything is alive with the libido of the unconscious. So Nietzsche is a part of Zaun's unconscious. Peterson is a part of Zaun's unconscious. The philosophers is a part of Zaun's unconscious. The cross the black cross is part of zone unconscious. Everything is libido, and it takes those shapes and it kind of dissects the whole psyche at once, and we can see the ego and what it is surrounded by as a psychological process. So when he's talking to Nietzsche and Peterson, it's the ego who's facing the aspect of the unconscious that's like Nietzsche, and it's facing the aspect of the unconscious that's like Peterson, and they come together and they have this dialectic, or however you want to call it, who's trying to make sense of what's going on. So in here, the ego is in the front row, kind of close to Nietzsche and Peterson. Nietzsche is the critic and Peterson is the one who can articulate. They're trying to bring this question of there's a big transition that's going to come, and what mode of being should be adapted. The idea here is that looking at the rearview mirrors or the shepherds of the past, they're not adequate for what's coming. This is where Nietzsche is this frustrated critic. So the death of God, or how to live in postmodern times, or the current demands of adaptation are not fully satisfied by David, Moses, or Jesus. So those modes of being, those psychological attitudes, they're not good enough. That's what the unconscious is telling us. This is not a judgment from my side. This is what the dream is saying. And so the question then is, what would be the right shepherd for this time? And I believe there's a solution in the dream if we look closely at it. I think it's revealed by the black cross in Jesus' barn. And as we talked about, this blackness means that the wholeness of zaun has not yet been discovered or uncovered. So what's the idea here? Why would the black cross be a good candidate? When you look at Jung's work and maybe Marie-Louise van France, the idea is that man carries a paradoxical wholeness, and that would be, in fact, a good shepherd for consciousness. So man's totality, or as a totality, what van France calls homo putissimus, or what Jung writes, man who knows and possesses everything human, that would be the right candidate to steward consciousness, to be a shepherd of the psyche. Here, shepherd, again, is an inner attitude. This dream is not asking zaun to be a shepherd towards the outer world, but to figure out what is the right attitude to adopt in these trying times. And as far as I can see, the end of the dream discusses the need to start this psychological work, to work toward reaching this mode of being. So that would be my interpretation for this dream. I'll read it. So the dreamer's unconscious is not satisfied with the shepherds of the past for the current demands made on consciousness. A new development must take place. This development is being presented as uncovering the black cross in Jesus' barn, which means something like retrieving the paradoxical wholeness from its current black or unconscious state. This is symbolized as the divine child, and in psychological language, the divine child is the redeeming potential future of the developing personality. And the final point is that the lineage of David, Moses, Jesus, as well as the other philosophers, the lovers of Sophia, suggests that this is an inherited task of a transpersonal quality. The ego is, so to speak, at the receiving end of a long development and must carry it forward, as emphasized by him being in the front row or being asked to be one of the first to work towards this development. So, that's the interpretation. I was going to ask you, what do you think about this? But I don't think that's the right questions. How do you feel about that? This is pretty striking, what I'm telling you. I mean, the dream is striking. I'm trying to translate the dream to you.
I'm not sure how I feel about it. Honestly, it's, I might have to think about this. I think it's interesting. I'm not really sure how I would go about sort of, because my struggle is with like how, like when you're trying to find an interpretation, like, is it, because I see dreams as like a mirror, and so like, say you're looking in a mirror, and then you notice something about your face that's not, oh, it's like, oh, this is on my face. I don't think I want my countenance to be so, standoffish. I need to adjust it like here a little. Like it's sort of like that, right? It's like there's something that the dream, it's like showing you yourself, but you need to well, it's not necessarily you need. It's like there's something that needs something you're able to look at to make an adjustment. I say that's how I see it, but it's not clear. Like, always unclear to me. Like, I guess self-evaluation is hard for me. Like, I'm not entirely sure why, but I've been fascinated with this idea of the shepherd. I knew about this character called the shepherdess, but she got me into knowing more, just trying to uncover what this kind of means symbolically. And and I didn't even know Jesus was. I didn't really know much about Christianity or like sort of this lineage of shepherds until sort of recently, and so this is all something my seems to be processing.
There's a great tension in the dream between Jesus being discarded as a shepherd and then the Jesus in the barn, right? And the idea here is that, how would you say that? One is kind of an attitude, like a leading attitude, and the second one would be a form of self, which is the second center of the personality, right? The cross here is, in Jung's language, is the self. It's the totality of the being that can best be represented by symbols that are like, crosses, circles, or mandalas. And the Jesus barn is indicating the divine child, or at least that's how I feel like. So there's a great tension between the Jesus that is regarded, the kind of King of Kings, and the Black Cross one.
And there's a sense that the cross itself has a sense that there's something there, but it's not able to be fully detected. It's like there's a liminality to this area around the cross, at least from the feeling that I get. Like, for some reason, that cross, I could still get this, so I guess a strong sort of feeling that I could still tell you, even though the dream was a week ago. A lot of time with a dream, if I have a dream, the feeling sort of goes away after some time, but this one, the cross doesn't seem to have lost any feeling.
Yeah.
Which in my sign, usually I'll write a poem if I have something like that happen, because I'm able to take the feeling and sort of turn it into this. Like, a poem is like halfway between dream and halfway into articulated. That's what Peterson says, and so like I think it's something that helps me able to get that idea out. But I think that there is something. It's like there's a sense that there's something there, but I can't see it for some reason, or it's like I need to get closer, or I need to inspect it in order for it to come out, I guess.
Yeah, one thing I would like to touch is one of the rules for interpretation is that the interpretation should not promote inflation or hubris. A dream like that is quite... crying baby in the back. I'm sure that's going to be nice on the recording. Anyway, it's quite striking, but I don't feel like it goes to your head. I don't feel like it inflates the ego. I feel like there's a bit of reluctance that comes with it. I think this is a good sign that we're uncovering something valuable, because it's not going straight to the head and, making big like a balloon, but there's a sense of, man, this is, I don't really know what to do with that. It's, I would say, for people who are introducing this kind of language, we are uncovering a small aspect of Zaun's personal myth. This is a small aspect of it. It's revealed by the creative ability of the unconscious. So this is what we're dealing with. This is not something I came up with. This is not something Zaun's ego has came up with. This is really something that we're discovering, both of us, because that's what the unconscious gives during dreams. You want to comment on this? Can you see this as an aspect of, an anticipation of or where your development should lead?
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think Jesus as a symbol for me has been at attention for recently in my life, because he stands for something, and like what these shepherds stand for, he sort of stands for that, but he stands for something more as well. I think that there's something about him that's he represents something that I still don't fully understand. And I know Jesus is a common symbol of the self, and so maybe there's something there that my unconscious is trying to put together like, where does he go?
Yeah, I mean, as I told you, this would be a humanized version of the cross, kind of. This is not the full answer because there's a long discussion on what Jesus symbolized in Ion, for instance. So we'll have to leave it at that. Now, usually when we are satisfied with the interpretation, we go into a last step, which would be to make the dream concrete. And the relevant question is, this is something I ask you. It's like, did you do anything about the dream? The idea here is that the dream must be registered physically. It must not remain an airy thought or a kind of a conceptual exercise or something we like to think about. It has to go down at the level of physicality. The wisdom of the dream must be embodied. This is why an action, or at the very least a change of attitude, is necessary. And this is what she responded. I don't think I'm ready for individuation. And this is why I responded. The dream says that you should be one of the first to do it. She said, well, I don't know how to do it. And, I know you. This is a fair response. You're not lying. This is something you have struggled with. Putting harder work doesn't seem to pay off too much. And this is where I was, thinking about this idea of starting this dream dialogue. And so I started writing to you, what about starting a dream dialogue? And as I put this onto the chat, you were writing a long message. And this is what you wrote. Here's a scene that emerged after pondering the dream. Peterson, Nietzsche, and I agree to inspect Christ's barn. Inside, he is crucified on the black cross with embers. We see a jug near and go to help with water inside. Christ says that the water won't put out spiritual fire. We are directed to a safe and use 430 to unlock it. Inside is a golden key and we take it to this silver door. When we open the silver door, a woman rushes past us. She runs up to the base of the cross and stares up at him. She then looks towards us. She's obscured in a white dress. And we know what to do. We make our way over and lift her. When she can reach him, she gives Christ a spiritual water. It flows from her breast, I suppose, to his mouth, and the embers are quelled. I don't think we need to understand the whole dream. I've bolded what I think is important, is that you have this suffering self, behind the black cross, there's the suffering self. So the self, strangely enough, is suffering. It can't come to actualization easily. And this spiritual fire that's burning him can't be helped with water. It can only be helped with this spiritual water, what is referred as the aqua permanens, the virgin's milk, the water of life, or the fountain of the soul. So the idea here is that the water, so the raw unconscious material, must be transformed into nourishing spiritual water for quelling the suffering of this second center of the personality, this wholeness that for some reason can't live well. So that's a look into your unconscious, saying that the ego start to see that there's a suffering within your own being and it needs to be nourished, appeased. When you told me that, I'm like, okay, this is a good omen that we can go with this first episode and maybe we'll do more of that, is I can benefit from the counter-transference and I can use the dream to transform it, to spiritualize it and bring it closer to you. So I'm not saying I own this spiritual water. I'm saying that when I saw that dream, I'm like, this dynamism is going to be approved by the unconscious and it's going to be done in a somewhat smooth manner. I'm kind of playing a role for you, if that makes sense. So this is my perspective as someone who see what the dream is kind of asking from you. What the dream is asking from you is to get the spiritual water, but here I'm playing this part of bringing it to you. Does that make any sense?
I think so. Yeah, you know more a lot about Leong's ideas than I do, for sure. So some of the terminology I'm not entirely sure, like counter transference. But
I'll just explain that. When you bring a dream like this to someone like me, it's gonna, your whole being, it's kind of like a field around your being, and it's gonna activate stuff in me, and those activated stuff in me is gonna kind of push me to respond in a certain way, and that's the transference, counter-transference. It's a relationship, and stuff from you pushes stuff out of me, and stuff out of me pushes stuff out of you. We kind of like dancing together.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're getting to the end. I'm going to have to address what's going on with my kids. Sorry for the recording if it shows up too much. do you have any last words?
Well, thank you for this. I think I have a little better understanding of what this is about. So hopefully we can continue.
And yeah, thanks to the audience. Hopefully this will continue and be useful to people who've paid attention to this conversation.